And welcome back to X's and O's. I am one of your co-hosts, Peter Borkowski, joined as always by our other co-host, Mr. Bubba Hayes. Bubba, how are we doing this fine Wednesday afternoon, late evening, whatever it is, early evening, I should
Pretty
say?
good. Still kind of, yeah, just getting caught up on everything after being on the road the last couple days.
So you're in I don't know what Alabama's nickname is, the Bama State, but oh well,
Not much going on down there.
uh, not too much, but. All right. Well, besides pissing off Alabamians, whatever they're called, we got some basketball to talk about. The NCAA men's tournament and women's tournament, for that matter, wrapped up this past weekend. Final four games for the men Saturday and or on Saturday. The women are on Friday. Championship games Sunday, Monday. We are gonna obviously predominantly talk about the men's tournament. That is what we've been talking about all day, all March, I should say. The women's championship game also, I don't know if you saw anything from it. Not really much to talk about on that one if we were going to. UCLA
Surprisingly,
putting BTA on South Carolina. So, but we're gonna stick on the men's side of thing. That's what we're familiar with, and we have our final four games on Saturday to go over. Our final two games in the final four on Saturday, and I guess we'll just start with the first one of the day, which was number two, UConn versus number three, Illinois. UConn obviously becoming a staple of the Final Four over the last 4 years. This was their third trip. Illinois, first time since '04, I want to say, something like that,
yep.
'04, '05, that they've made it to the Final Four. Not able to get the job done, however, UConn pulling away with that one, 71 to 62, clinching their spot in the championship game. I did watch all of this one. Um, I guess, Bubba, before we get into my thoughts, let's hear what you have to say about the Huskies taking down the Illini.
Yeah, I was honestly a little bit surprised by both of the games. Obviously, more so the second one than the first one. Um, I think UConn had a pretty good performance in that game, especially offensively. There's been really the main question hanging over them was could they, score enough points in some of these matchups to get through. They got a really, good strong performance from Solo Ball that night, who has not been particularly impressive for them before in the tournament. I think he put up 11 points, which was pretty good for him. But I think the main thing for UConn was that they seemed to be kind of just in control for most of the game, or at least most of the second half. They kind of created a little bit of separation, and I was really surprised. Not necessarily with how good their defense played against Illinois, but I just didn't really see the game going that way. But credit to UConn, who played pretty great defense the whole game. Holding Illinois to 63 points is pretty impressive, and they had the offense to match. Because we saw in the last game or two games ago how good Illinois' defense can be when they manage to keep Houston to a very low score, and kind of win a game that is really not their style play at all. So I was pretty impressed by UConn's performance.
Yeah, I mean, I remember at the start of the game, I was a little taken aback by, I don't know if it was a combination of how good the defenses were or how bad the offenses were, because the beginning of the game was a
Yeah,
bit of a slugfest,
yeah, Snooze
if
Fest. Yeah.
to put it gently. Um, the two other things that really stood out to me about UConn is first off the rebounding numbers. They out rebounded Illinois
Hmm.
by 44 to 37 total rebounds. Obviously, Illinois, one of their whole identities was just
Yeah.
the height and the length of that team. I am, I think I'm 99% certain they were the tallest team in college basketball this year. Um, and
Hmm.
it didn't really seem like it. UConn had it, and that comes down to schematics, that comes down to coaching, being able to out rebound a team who is clearly a bigger physical threat than you are. The other thing that was kind of
Hmm.
weird was UConn had at least three 2+ minute scoring droughts throughout the game, and they had at
Yeah.
least two that were just around or over 5 minutes. Um,
Yeah.
and usually, again, especially against a good offense like Illinois, that's a death sentence if you don't score for more than 2 minutes, and you do that multiple
Yeah.
times a game. But like you said, you got to give a lot of credit to UConn. and their defense specifically that they're just able to keep Illinois in check. And they were, like you said, they gave themselves enough of a cushion that they could withstand a couple bad scoring droughts that they went on. Um,
Hmm.
Illinois only shot 6 for 26 from beyond the arc. Obviously, that's not going to usually cut it, especially because UConn was 12 for 33 from beyond the arc, so 36 to 23% in that category. Field goal percentage is about the same, 35 to 34. But yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
I wasn't surprised by the result. I thought Illinois was a better team on paper, honestly. Just with
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
size and how much offensive talent they have. Wagler, I think it's whatever it is. Had 20 points. He had a solid game, 20 and 8, 2 for 10 from three, though, not great. Um, but as we've kind of been saying throughout the whole tournament, it really also comes down to coaching. Obviously, you have
Yeah.
two good coaches in Underwood and Dan Hurley, but different tiers of good coaches at that. I mean, Hurley's been there 3 of the last 4 years, won 2 titles. Um, Underwood, as good a coach as he is, hasn't been there. So, and I think we kind of saw it take maybe a little bit of an effect. Um, so I'm not surprised by the result, but
Yeah.
still, I think it's a big testament to just UConn's culture, their coaching, that they're able to take on
Yeah.
kind of a whole bunch of different types of teams. You know, Illinois, obviously, the very
Yeah.
tall, lengthy, physical team, and it doesn't really matter. They're still going to win those games.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I agree. I really just, I think that's a really big testament to them and kind of what they've built there in the last couple years. And obviously, as we'll get to the next game and talk about how well they, played and kind of defied the expectations against Michigan.
yeah, and then as for a postmortem on
Hmm.
Illinois, um, I'm interested to see where they go from here because they're always a good team, or they have been the last couple of years under Underwood.
Yeah.
This is kind of the first year that it felt like they really broke through and started to make some real noise in the
Yeah.
postseason. Obviously, like we said, first Final Four in over 20 years.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I mean, I'm not sure exactly who they're going to lose to the draft this year. I wouldn't be surprised if Wagler goes somewhere. If he enters the
Hmm.
draft, that is, someone will probably scoop him up. Um, but,
Yeah.
Underwood seems to just have that magic Eastern European touch somehow. He's just able to bring a fleet of them over every year. And like
Yeah.
we said, they're usually big, they're usually good. And as we saw with the eventual tournament winner this year, size still matters a lot. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think, they ran into a really well coached team who was able to work around it. But if you come back with another really big team, you're going to have I think you'll have another very successful year. So, any final thoughts on UConn, Illinois?
Yeah. No, I think I would just kind of echo what you said. I'm interested to see kind of how Brad Underwood pieces together his roster, depending on how many pieces he loses. They've been a pretty consistently good team for a while now. This was just the first year they finally broke through, winning the Big Ten tournament once in the last couple of years, usually a pretty high seed. So I expect them to continue to be competitive and, having a chance. Finally for Brad Underwood getting to the Final Four. That was definitely something he can kind of check off the list, going all the way from, the JUCO ranks, moving up to Stephen F. Austin, the mid-major, Oklahoma State, now at Illinois.
Yeah. Yeah. The only other thing I forgot to say was, like you said, it did feel like UConn was in control the whole way through. Um, you know, they would go on those droughts. Illinois would pull back within 4 or 5, and then UConn would kind of pull away again. And that's another mark of a good team of
Hmm.
when you get punched, when you
Yeah.
go on a scoring drought, how do you bounce back? And UConn did a really
Hmm.
good job of that. Even when things were looking really bad for a couple minutes, they would kind of pull right back in it. So, all right. And then the real shock from Saturday,
Yeah.
and probably honestly the championship game that was just happened to be played in the
Yeah.
semifinals. Number one Michigan, number one Arizona. Michigan absolutely taking care of business, won at 91-73.
Yeah,
I saw probably the
man.
first 10 minutes, and then I went to the theaters to see a movie, so I wasn't able to watch the whole thing. But even from the 10 minutes I saw, I could tell right away that Michigan was thoroughly in control. Um, I'll kind of
Yeah,
I'll let you take it the rest of the way just because I guarantee you watched more than I did. So, but yeah,
yeah.
not what a I mean, 1v1, you don't really know who's going to win. I had my money on Arizona, actually.
Hmm.
Figuratively, I had my money
Yeah.
on Arizona. But yeah, I mean, what in your eyes, what was Michigan doing? What happened that led to this, near 20-point win?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because last week we, I think rightfully hyped this up for the game that we all kind of thought it was going to be. And Michigan is, it's kind of a tale of two things. They're very dominant offensive, obviously, in part because of their size. But what has kind of gone under the radar is how good defensively they are, also because of their size. And the one thing we've seen in this tournament is just how dominant their defense can be. I think I saw their last four games, they have held their opponents to what ended up being near their season lows in field goal percentage. That was the case with Arizona in this one. I
Right.
think they were held to, what was it, 32%, or maybe it was like
Uh,
35, 36, but
it
it was their season low.
it was
Um,
37%. So,
37%, which was actually their season low in that
mhm,
game. And so, I think part of it for Arizona is like, maybe not a great matchup. It just didn't really work out that way. Part of it, I think, is experience. Arizona is very reliant on their freshmen. They had Bradley, who was a really good player, but very, at least in the scoring department, very reliant on freshmen. And obviously, you never know how that's gonna, be handled under the lights there in the Final Four. But it wasn't necessarily that they were just, missing shots. They just really were kind of manhandled by Michigan. And they had absolutely no answer for them on the offensive glass. And so that was a really big issue. I think Michigan is just a very well balanced team, and they
mhm.
just kind of proved that they were the better team. I think it was kind of like splitting hairs between both of them, kind of in the talk of it, you know. But I just think Michigan proved themselves to be dominant. Yeah, I did watch pretty much the entire game, and I think you were probably only needed to watch the first 10 minutes because it didn't get any more interesting after that. That was pretty much, what happened. But it was just honestly really, it was pretty clear to me that Arizona was not going to be able to compete with them. But I was just watching it like, I mean, God, they have to make it more of a game than this, right? Like, this is unbelievable. Like, for how good they were the whole year to just be kind of, put down like that. I think it's a little bit disappointing for them, obviously. Tommy Lloyd in his first Final Four. But it shouldn't take away for how good they were this year because, they were historically good. It was just this year we had multiple teams that were really dominant, and obviously only one team can win. You're right, it was kind of the de facto championship game. It's a shame that had to be a Final Four matchup. But yeah, it was a great game for Michigan, and they proved why they were there and why, they were the deserving national champions.
Yeah, and you talk about the offense. I mean, Michigan only got, let's see, 20, only got 25 points off the bench. Um, from two
Hmm.
players too, Gale Jr. and then McKinney, 9 and 16, and then all their starters were in double digits. Besides Burnett, he only had six. Even Lindeborg, who left after 14 minutes,
Yeah,
he still ended up with 11. He went 3 for 3 from beyond the arc.
yeah.
His only field goals were 3 pointers before he left the court.
Hmm.
Obviously, we'd probably talk about that a bit more, but didn't really matter in the long run.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I mean, Arizona had one starter above 13 points and then no bench players. One bench player at 8,
Yeah.
Awaka, and then two had 3, and then no one else had anything. They only played a handful of minutes
Yeah.
collectively, but still. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I just it's so it's kind of hard to recap a game like that because it's
Yeah.
like you said, it was probably the two best college basketball teams all season. Were meeting in the
Yeah.
semis, and one of them clearly played harder, better coach, whatever you want to chalk it up to. Because yeah, Arizona just
Yeah.
did not show up, which again was I really did think Arizona was going to win it. Um, Obviously Michigan was coming off that huge win over Tennessee, um,
Hmm.
but um, yeah, Tennessee. But before that, Arizona had been throttling everybody. So, and like you
Yeah.
said, I'm not surprised Michigan won, but it's just surprising how they won. Because you did
Yeah.
not
I,
expect
I I don't think
point
anybody saw that coming.
a 20 point blowout. And either way, if Arizona won by 20, I think it would be the
Yeah.
same story. So, um,
Yeah.
but Air again postseason on Arizona. I mean, they'll be fine. Like they are still. Um, I do wonder, like you said, they were really relying on freshmen, um, especially with the portal now. I kind of wonder, will he change that mindset at all? Obviously, you still want freshmen to come in because that's a death sentence if you don't bring in freshmen. But, can you go out and get some older guys to come in and be that leadership? I don't know. It'll be interesting. I mean, obviously, a team like Arizona, they can probably get just about whoever they want, in the portal. So,
Hmm.
um, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. But all right, let's move on to the championship game. We will have a bit of a shorter episode here today, but championship number 1 Michigan versus number 2 UConn. Michigan winning it, winning the title 69 nice to 63. Um, Again, kind of like the UConn Illinois game, and but not to the same extent. It felt like Michigan was in control for most of it. Um, they only won by 6, which is not a huge margin. And UConn did kind of put up a fight at the very end that made you probably
Yeah.
gave Duke fans some PTSD. Um, but even that, I mean, even when it was really close, I mean, Michigan was only up by 4 after one, and then they only won the second half by 2.
Hmm.
I don't know. It just felt like Michigan had Michigan had it. They were bigger. And I think you could really tell. I mean, rebounds were actually in favor of UConn, but it felt like
Yeah.
Michigan was still a little more dominant on that front. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know. What were your takeaways from the title game?
Yeah, I didn't feel like Michigan played their best game, but I think that was partly because
No.
of how well UConn played.
Hmm.
It definitely wasn't their best shooting night. But the one thing
No,
I'll
no
say
one
was,
shot well.
I don't think there was, yeah. I don't think there was really any point in the game where I was like, oh, this you kind of could win this. But I think that first 10 minutes was like, okay, like, this could be a competitive game. Like they're not going to get blown out like Arizona did. Like
Right.
UConn really established themselves physically. And, even though Michigan was up by 4 at halftime, I think Coach Hurley was probably happy with the fact that, they were kind of playing the type of game that UConn wanted to play. And so, going into the half only down 4, it was like, okay, we're showing that we're very competitive with them. This is the type of basketball game that we kind of thrive in. So I think for them, it was kind of like, okay, like, let's go. But it was just kind of too much there in the second half for Michigan, even though it wasn't maybe their best night. They were still,
Hmm.
by far the better team. They were just kind of a cat and mouse game, kind of just keeping UConn off in the distance. They tried to make a couple of runs, but it never really got closer than like 5 in the second half. It
Right.
just kept stretching back between 5 and 10. So it didn't really ever seem like it was in doubt that Michigan was going to win that game. A little bit down in the wire there, missing some pretty easy shots there. I think it got down to 4 there with like a minute left, and UConn had a chance after Michigan you know, missed a couple to kind of take the 3 or 2 and get it to a one possession game. But Caravan put up a pretty poor shot, and that was pretty much lights out
Hmm.
after that. But yeah, I honestly think it was going into the game. I think everybody's expectation was that Michigan was just going to kind of blow them out. I think the line was only 6.5 or so. So maybe some people were at least giving respect to, UConn, but I think the expectation for most people is like, man, Michigan, they're by far the best team. Like they're going to win this game pretty easily, and it wasn't easy, that's for sure.
No.
But I would say I think the better team won, and just capping off a really incredible year for Michigan. And honestly, I think UConn too, because this was not the best team they've had by far in recent years, but
Mhm.
still managing to get to the championship game, ending the career of Caravan, who, maybe he's not the most dominant player on the court, but talking about all the success of Coach Hurley, three championship games in 4 years, two titles. Well, Caravan had all of those things too, and I think that really
Right.
says something with how much respect people have for him that he stuck around for 4 years and was kind of the leader of that team, even though maybe he wasn't the best player.
Yeah, and you know, another thing, going back to Michigan that really impressed me is just the ways that and I think we've said it before, the ways they were able to win. I mean, they only took 15
Hmm.
three-pointers this entire game and they went 2 for 15.
Yeah.
Like the three-pointer was a non-factor for them. Um,
Yeah.
UConn, meanwhile, only shot 27%. They chucked up 33 though and went 9 for 33. And like you
Yeah.
said, there were a lot of, I mean, I don't want to say, I don't like saying easy misses because I couldn't hit them, but like there were a lot of shots that you're like, how did you not make that? I mean, good ball
Yeah.
movement, a fairly open shot, and he just shanks it. It just bricks the shot. And I think you gotta give credit to Michigan that not that they were reliant on the three-pointer at any point this tournament, but just they saw, all right, like it's not really
Yeah.
falling. Let's just go to the inside, kill them inside, which is what they did. They had the size for it. They also had to, play around Lindeborg, who, played 36 minutes, but obviously wasn't 100%
Yeah.
after getting hurt in the semis against Arizona. He only had 13, went 0 for 5 from beyond the arc, but, they got 12 from Johnson. Mara didn't have a super amazing night. He only had 8 with 4 rebounds, but
Yeah.
Cato stepped up. He had 19. So just the ways
Yeah.
that they're able is like, you can throw whatever, bad 3-point shooting, they're just going to go inside. And that's the testament to, the adaptability of the players, but also the coaching. Um, so yeah, like you said, I mean, Michigan proved that they were the best team for most of the year, besides maybe, I mean, you could throw Arizona in that too if
Yeah.
you wanted, but obviously they kind of dispelled any ideas about that in the semis. So, um, yeah, the Big Ten's kind of running things right now.
Yeah.
I mean, three titles in one year between Michigan, UCLA, who we mentioned won the women's tourney. I mean, the fact UCLA is in the Big Ten is a joke, but still, they are technically.
Yeah.
And then
Hmm.
Indiana winning football. So, and Ohio State won last year's football. So, um, yeah,
Yep. And
not a
Michigan the
bad
year
time,
before that.
right? So, not a bad time to be a Big Ten fan. So,
Yeah, for
all right.
sure.
Well, to wrap up here, like I said, a bit of a shorter episode, but just kind of March Madness thoughts on the whole. Um, I guess I'll start with probably the easiest question. Good tournament, bad tournament. What do you think?
I thought it was a great tournament. This was probably the most I've watched in the last couple years. I really enjoyed pretty much the entire tournament, especially the first couple rounds. Some really great games. There's been a lot of talk about how, oh, some people think NIL is kind of killing the tournament. I say F that. Like, that is not the case at all. We've
Hmm.
had a lot of really great games, really good teams. Sure, maybe you're not as likely to get a really big upset, but you still got some really great games and some great performances, and as always, great storylines to follow.
Yeah, sorry, I'm taking care of my guinea pig who's squealing his ass off. Yeah, I think if you look at the quality of the tournament as a whole in terms of the games we got, it was really good, especially past round of 32, Sweet 16 onwards, like there
Hmm.
were some killer games. I mean, UConn Duke is probably one of the best games we've seen in a while. Going back to the first round, VCU, North Carolina. That was a great game. Like there were some really absolute banger games throughout this whole tournament. Now,
Hmm.
yes, if you watch March Madness for the madness aspect of it, the upsets, the big, the unexpected, probably not the best tournament for that. I mean, it was a pretty chalky tournament. And like you
Yeah,
kind of alluded to, just with NIL and how much of a factor money is these days, like I think we're just going to see that mid majors, they just get picked clean every year by those top tier programs who can give those players as much money as they want, which is unfortunate, but it is the state of things. But it's also a good sign that despite that the P5 schools still kind of ran the tournament, it was still a really entertaining tournament. Um, just
hmm,
not a ton of blowouts. It's unfortunate that one happened in the final four, but not a ton
yeah,
of, blowouts across the board. Obviously, you're always going to have a couple, but um, yeah, just really entertaining games. Um, Kind of speaking of, the not mid majors, but the unexpected, who is the Cinderella of the tournament to you?
that's a good question.
I
I
think there are
guess I
two.
go
I
with
think there are
Iowa.
two.
Just
I was gonna say, I feel like there are two answers.
yeah,
I think it's got to
I
be
think
Iowa.
Iowa was probably yeah. I think they were. I would say the biggest story of the tournament, at least beating I think it was kind of the arrival of Ben McCollum to the national stage. I think now going forward, every year you're going to see his name into consideration for some of those top jobs. He was already sort of getting, his name thrown out there for the UNC job. Obviously, they didn't. I don't know if he had any interest in that job, but his name was already out there for that. So I think that's something Iowa fans are gonna have to live with, every year now going forward. So they may just want to learn to cover their ears at certain points of those discussions. But
Mhm.
yeah, I would say Iowa just kind of for beating Florida, the defending champion, and making it to the Elite Eight. I think that was a pretty good story. Also, Nebraska, honestly, making it to the Sweet
Yeah,
16. I think that was a pretty good story.
yeah. I
I think that there were a couple majors like SLU who put up a very respectful showing and have kind
Mhm.
of done good things for their programs moving forward.
Yeah, I think the obvious candidates are Iowa, who has my vote, and then you could throw Texas in there, obviously going from the final four, the first four to would they end up winning two rounds, right? They make it to the 16, I think.
Yeah, they got to the Sweet 16. Yep.
Um, I did also think Nebraska, even though they were a four seed, which isn't typically, Cinderella territory, but just with their lack of history in the tournament, that was really fun to see. Them not go all the way, but go as far as they did, and then get knocked out
Hmm.
by, like I said, probably the Cinderella of the tourney um, in Iowa. All right, two more questions before we wrap up. Who was most disappointing to you?
Um, hmm. I think it has to be Duke. I
Mm.
think the not just them losing, but the way they lost.
Yeah.
We talked about it a lot last week. Like, not like personally disappointing for me, but I mean, their fan base is not going to be happy with that. They obviously have a great track record of winning, and, that's not winning. That was
Mm.
a really bad loss, and it's now two pretty major chokes for John Shire in his early tenure at Duke in the tournament. So it's like, he's going to have some kind of, pressure moving forward. I will say something that was disappointing to me was, the injury that Iowa State faced.
Yeah,
Just
true.
because I also think that would have been an interesting game if had they made it through to play Michigan. I'm not
Hmm.
saying they would have won, but I think that would have been a really fascinating game. And maybe that changes the outcome of this tournament if you have Michigan having to face Iowa State and then Arizona and then
Hmm.
UConn. Like, do they get through all three of those? I don't know because they were kind of able to breeze through against Tennessee, and I just feel like Iowa State would have given them a really, a good, game. And so I think that
Yeah.
was disappointing, to have, a kind of an early injury in the tournament for Iowa State, because they were one of the teams I was most impressed with all year.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are a couple. I think even though we kind of dogged on them a little bit, I think you could throw Florida in there. Defending champs, you go out in round two to an Iowa team who really doesn't have tournament history. I think you could throw Houston in there and the way they lost to Illinois. Um, they look not great. I A team I was high on was Gonzaga, probably foolishly. Getting knocked out by an 11. Michigan State you can maybe throw on there, but they ran into UConn. And I mean, that's the reason I wouldn't say Duke personally is yes, absolutely catastrophic failure. But on the surface, if you just told me UConn beat Duke, I don't think that's an absolute embarrassment for Duke. Because UConn, I mean, they were a 2 seed and they've been, the blue blood for the last couple of years, probably of the last, since the 2020 started. Um, Now, again, you factor in the way that they lost. It's like, all right, yeah, that's not pretty, but still, just be at least it was to UConn, who was the second best team seeding wise in that region of the bracket. Um, I don't know. I think there are a good couple answers. Um, all right, last question. Moving away from the tournament to wrap up here. You mentioned the UNC coaching job obviously has been filled. Mike Malone, former NBA champ, just 3 years ago now with Denver, filling their seat. What's your take on that? Because I think that's an interesting hire, kind of out of the blue too.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. And that was, kind of the direction it was expected UNC to go. Obviously they had, their old coach for a very long time. He steps down. Hubert Davis comes in, was kind of like the inside man. They didn't really do like a formal, outside search.
Right.
And so it's kind of been their tradition to kind of look inside the Tar Heel family for that
Yeah,
job. And
keep it in the
I think the
family.
expectation yeah, I think the expectation was they were going to go outside the family, and that's exactly what they did. Yeah, I really didn't hear much, discussion about Malone from like, most of like the kind of national outlets. It was only the kind of like really like, kind of like inside the, it was just interesting because I just really didn't see that much about him other than a couple people talking about it. I'm not against the move. It does seem to be something that we're starting to see more often is, kind of that, you know, uh, transition from NBA to college or the other way around as well.
Right.
So I think it's going to be I think it's going to be an interesting, move. Obviously, he's a really good coach. His
Mhm.
pedigree speaks for itself. It's just going to be a question of can he recruit, which, shouldn't really be a concern at a school like North Carolina. Like they're going to be able to do pretty much, anything. So I do think it's going to be interesting to see how his coaching style kind of translates to the college game. But I do kind of like the move for UNC because it shows that they're kind of willing to go in a new direction, which is pretty much what they needed to do after, what's been a fairly disappointing last like 5, 10 years for them. After I think they maybe have won once in the last 5 or 10 years, but they have not consistently been a good team for quite a while now. And other than one kind of run saving Hubert Davis's job for a really long time, they've really not been the North Carolina that you would expect.
Yeah, I think it's interest. I mean, I kind of echo your thoughts. I think Malone is a really good coach, obviously. I was a little surprised when Denver let him go last season.
Hmm.
I mean, you win an NBA championship, that's the peak of basketball. I mean,
Yeah,
obviously he was helped out by having the best player in the world on his roster, but still, I do think he's a good coach. Like you said, I think the biggest question is just going to be how does he adapt to the college game? And I think the two things kind of working in his
yeah,
favor are, the college game, NBA game are not as separated as they used to be. in terms of style. And so I think that kind of helps
Hmm.
his case. And then just, the recruiting thing, like you said, it helps that he's at UNC, which is always going to be able to pull kids in because it's UNC, even though, like you said, they have not been that UNC for a little bit now. The other thing that someone pointed out to me is, just with NIL, recruiting, especially transfers, is so much more like a free agency now. Which is
Yeah,
obviously something he has, experience in coming from the NBA. So a kid comes up to you as
yeah,
long as he's interested in playing for you, comes up and says, "Here's my number," and then that's where you go from. So I think that helps him out
yeah,
too. Um, he does have ties to UNC, which I didn't realize his daughter plays on the volleyball team.
yeah,
So he is around Chapel Hill quite a bit, or has been around
yeah.
Chapel Hill quite a bit, and now he's going to be even more, obviously. The last thing is I've heard some people, not a lot, but some are comparing it to the Belichick hire, which I just think is, apples and
Mm.
oranges.
No, yeah, yeah.
You have a guy who was coaching the NBA, a year ago and doesn't really have a
Hmm.
lot of baggage with him versus Bill Belichick. So I think that's a bad comparison. I think it'll work out a lot better than the Belichick
Yeah,
experiment has
yeah,
so far. But no, definitely interested to see. I mean, you don't see a lot of straight from the NBA to college as compared to
yeah.
college to the NBA. So that's definitely going to be interesting. But all right. Well, like I said, shorter episode. Only had 3 games to talk about, so that'll do it. We'll be back next week. Probably talk about some baseball, perhaps. We'll be what, three weeks in. Yeah, I'm glad I'm
Yep.
talking because the fans couldn't see what you just did. So, yeah, we'll be about 3 weeks in. So, um, we'll have a lot to talk about. Hopefully, my Cubbies start playing a lot better by then because, dear God, what a shit show it's been so far.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, we'll reconvene then and talk about some baseball. So, Bubba, as always, a pleasure. Go lock up some future Gorlocks. Um, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday evening.
Yeah, you too. It's about to be better because the Cardinals are gonna win another series. So,
Yeah, well, hey, we all have dreams. We all have pipe dreams. So, all right.
well, that's a reality, though.
Yeah, okay, sure. All right, everyone, take care. We'll see everyone next week.